G'day, my name is Chris. This is my first video on this brand new channel. So I have another channel called G'day Geeks. I'll link to that at the end of this short video. That's all about action figures, and as you can tell behind me, I'm currently in my toy room and I'm surrounded by action figures. But my first love really is comics, and I just turned 50. Yay me, happy birthday. And I've been collecting comics for probably about 40 years, honestly. So I've got quite an extensive collection of comics, not in my tiny little apartment, but elsewhere. But there are kind of nods to comics and stacks of comics scattered around this apartment and hanging on the wall, because as I said, it is my first love, with action figures a close second. So I thought, why not use this YouTube channel as an opportunity to kind of go through some of my comics and revisit some of the things that I need to dig out of short and long boxes. So I'm very excited to do that. So I thought I'd start this first ever episode with a look at something very exciting, this first ever issue of Comics, the magazine. Before we get into looking at Comics, the magazine, I'll just show you some of the stuff I also picked up over the last week or two from my comic shop, including the Marvel Team Up issue number 14, and yes, that is Spider-Man and Invincible hanging out together. So this is actually what we call a facsimile, a reprint of the 2006 issue, which they originally featured in. So yes, that's a very expensive and difficult issue to get a hold of. So 20 years later we get a reprint, which is absolutely awesome. So yes, that's lovely. Here is Batman, and I love that they've brought the corner boxes back. So Batman obviously from DC Comics issue 7 with the new writer Matt Fraction and artist Jorge Jimenez, and as you can see on the cover, features a stunning fold out sequence as we kind of go inside of the Joker's brain, which is pretty awesome, as Batman visits the Joker. And yeah, so that's the Joker in his little back to tank kind of thing, and that's what his brain looks like. Not doing it justice, but absolutely awesome. I love when comics do these kind of tricks. This is very popular at the moment, so this is the second printing of a Dork #1. Being a Dungeons & Dragons player, I am a bit of a sucker for fantasy, so this is half dwarf, half orc, or dork, so a bit of a fantasy comedy. Pretty awesome cover there. And lastly, we've got the Red Band mature version of Alias #1, and yes, Red Band, so it's for adults only, came in a poly bag. And yes, I just love the David Mack cover as well, lovely artwork. So there's just 4 of the comics I got. Now let's look at Comics, the magazine. What I'm holding in my hands is a magazine about comics, funnily enough called Comics, the magazine. I actually ran across this on Instagram and very happy that I did. Thankfully my local comic shop had quite a few issues, so I managed to grab one, and I was so impressed by it, I grabbed a second one as a gift for a friend of mine for his birthday. So yes, Comics, the magazine, as you can tell, this is issue 1. It's got absolute Batman on the cover, and inside is some absolute goodness. How awesome is it to have a magazine all about comics? So obviously those of you who are of my vintage, I just turned 50, you would remember the Wizard, the Guide to Comics magazine in the 90s, which was an absolute juggernaut. It's been years and years and years since that has ceased publication, and there hasn't really been any replacement. So it's been awesome to see the buzz about this new aptly titled Comics, the magazine, online. So very glad to have a copy here. And so #1, only $3 American, which turns out to be about $7 Australian. As you can tell, we've got an awesome piece of largely original art with absolute Batman on the cover, and an interview with the whole creative team, which is pretty awesome. So I'm not going to flick through every page. I do recommend that you get one yourself. Let's open it up. Obviously we start with the contents page, and there's some pretty cool ads throughout. We've got a bit of basically a letter from the magazine telling the reader what this magazine is all about. We've got some more ads, and we've got the first mailbag, which is a letter, rather funny letter from famed writer Chip Zdarsky. And we've got, I think it's a 6-page interview with the whole creative team of the runaway success of Absolute Batman, which, if you're not familiar, Absolute Batman is a reimagining of Batman, and now it's launched a whole absolute lines. There's absolute Superman, Wonder Woman, Flash, Green Lantern, Martian Manhunter. They just keep pumping them out. Absolute Catwoman is on its way, so it's a great starting point. So I think this launched about a year ago, Absolute Batman, and it's still going strong. It's on its like 10th or 11th printing. Very, very popular. So yes, a complete interview with the whole creative team, which is absolutely awesome. And so yeah, we've got Scott Snyder, the writer, and the artist Nick Dragotta, but also the editorial letters and colours and all that kind of stuff. So it's absolutely fabulous that they've got this, and it's really interesting. Like, it's really insightful. It's not just a promo puff piece. I love this kind of deep dive into the creative process. So highly recommend reading that, and plus a bit of a preview and a look at the creation of the next one, Absolute Catwoman. For those of you who like Chew, Image Comics series Chew, there's a one-pager comic there, and also a one-page interview with MMA fighter Ronda Rousey and her first comic. We've got a look at Rick Veitch's Swamp Thing from the 80s, which is finally getting ascending, printed by DC Comics. And then we've got a pretty interesting interview with 3 creators who have created their own universes. So we've got Scotty Young, Kyle Higgins, and Tony Fleeks, all very interesting creators, and the universes that they have created. We keep flicking, and yes, as I said, I'll flick through every page, so encourage you to buy it yourself. This is interesting. So this is a look at the history of fanzines, or history of comics magazines, and it's quite a rich history, so you can tell. And Jim Rugg wrote this, another famed writer, artist, creator, and I love this kind of infographic here. I just love the colours and the way they've laid that out. Absolutely fabulous. We know that comics magazines have been around for decades, and I've got quite a few in my collection, so very happy to have this comics magazine in my collection. We've got a bit of a style guide, or a bit of an artist drawing guide from Andy McDonald, and then we've got something very familiar to Wizard and other comics publications back in the day. This is a look at their picks of what's coming out, what series is coming out, what they recommend, which is lovely that they're getting not only just Marvel and DC, but independent, Dark Horse and Image and all those, some spotlight as well. More ads, which is fair enough. What is a comics magazine without a Hot 100 list? So here we go, a bit of a nod to Wizard and all the lists that they used to have, and some top 10 cover artists, interior artists and writers, plus the top 10 publishers. Very much like Wizard, glad they included this. Lastly, an editorial piece from one of the creators of Comics Magazine, Joseph Keating, who's a familiar name if you've been around comics long enough, and then a bit of a look about the comics that they actually mention in this issue, which is fabulous. So issue 2 and 3, they've already shown the covers for those. So issue 2 is on Battle Beast from the Invincible universe, and issue number 3 is on the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So just a brief look at Comics the Magazine. I do recommend picking it up, and if you're interested in more about how this whole magazine came together, I do recommend you listening to the March 9th episode of a podcast called Wizards, the Podcast Guide to Comics. So that's a podcast which I only just found out. It was a happy accident on Spotify, but I'm going to go back and listen to more. But basically, Wizards, the podcast, looks at the previous back issues of the Wizard magazine from the 90s and 2000s, and looks at them from today's lens and kind of that kind of stuff. So it's pretty interesting. And they interviewed Adam Freeman, Joe Keating, and Gabe Yoakum, 3 of the people who put this magazine together, and the choices they made, how they worked with DC, what stimulated the production and publication of this. So yeah, a bit of behind the scenes stuff, but very insightful and interesting. And they said in that episode that they sold 100,000 copies, so pretty awesome. Very happy to hear that. And as I said, they've already shown the covers for issue 2 and 3, so hopefully more are coming. So there you go, a very brief look, but happy to get more Comics the Magazine in the future for sure. So there we go, Comics the Magazine, check it out.